You don't need closure from them, you need it from yourself. Welcome back. It's Michelle here from happyhealthyher.com, where I discuss all things mind, body, and spirit so that you can live your happiest, healthiest life. In this week's Compassionate Chat, we are talking about the myth of closure. We'll discuss what we tend to think it is, what it really is, and finally we'll uncover 8 ways you can give it to yourself. To begin, I never really even thought that much about the concept of closure. In fact, I never even knew of it as a word until I was in online dating. And I started to realize that people come and go, there's ghosting, and people just disappear, and you have absolutely no closure because you don't actually have exposure to these people that you had been in a communication with. It's very jarring. So I started seeking information on closure, and what I found was really interesting because the true nature of closure really needs to come from ourselves. So we'll get into that now. The closure that I'm talking about is really determining the why behind a situation. It's basically wanting things to be all tied up with a bow, like a shiny new present. We assume that if we can just make sense of that why, of why someone did something, or why something went the wrong way, theoretically, in our minds, that we can then let it all go and finally feel better about it. Now, if you're an overthinker like I am, if you are the INFJ personality type, which is deeply introspective and wants to make sense of everything, this can be even more difficult, especially even if you were just a practical person who wants a common sense approach to things. Oftentimes, things do not make sense, and you have to get sort of comfortable with that. Many things, again, don't make logical sense, and we rarely get the closure that we want and think that we need. And this can be especially true if we're dealing with people who are emotionally unavailable, meaning they're not in touch with their feelings. This is actually very, very common scenario in online dating. A lot of people in online dating are there because they're bored. They're not necessarily really looking for a deep connection with another person. Maybe even they're just looking for a physical connection. And so if you are not that way, when you're in that world, you can get very confused and really not understand sort of what's happening around you and why people are just disappearing left and right, or ghosting you, or blocking you, or other things that can seem very, very hurtful. The same is true if you're dealing with manipulative or narcissistic people. It can be extremely confusing to deal with someone like that. I've talked before about how illogical narcissists can be in that they will hurt the people who love and support them the most. I'll link to a video on that below if you want more clarity on that. But the reality is that sometimes we are better off not knowing why someone hurt us. The truth could end up being far crueler than we could even imagine, and the closure we're seeking really isn't necessarily what we will ever get or what we actually need. So I can think of 2 specific incidences where I really, really desperately wanted closure, and I actually got it, and it didn't turn out to be how it was cracked up to be. It didn't turn out to make me feel that much better. So the first was in a dating experience, and I've talked about this experience before when I was talking about my nature as an empath and how I tend to feel and sense other people's energy. This was something that became really kind of overwhelming for me at times during online dating, and in one particular incident, I was dating someone for a couple months, and I started to find that I was becoming like his therapist. He would just come over my house and then just dump all his problems on me. Complained about his family, complained about his work, he complained about really everything you could imagine. And over time, I was just feeling so overwhelmed and drained and even depressed by this relationship. But I really cared for him. And I can honestly say I had love for him, as I loved many times the people that I dated. And it was kind of heartbreaking to see that he was not aware of what he was doing to me. And he really had no sense of boundaries or even like how I was feeling. So I sort of said to myself, okay, he was coming over. We were going to go out to dinner. And I said, you know what? I'm going to just see how this goes. But if he shows up today and he does the same stuff he always does, I'm going to give him some really strong boundaries, some redirection. I'm going to make it really clear that I don't want to just keep talking about negative topics. So we happened to go for a walk as soon as he got to my house, and immediately he launched into the latest saga. And it was, one thing after another, and I was giving him very clear verbal feedback, trying to redirect the conversation to something more positive, trying to talk about, anything other than the negative of where he kept going. And as we're walking through my neighborhood, he's actually pointing out people's yards and like, oh, look at that person's yard, it's so messy, and look at that person's yard, they have funny shutters. And I was like, wow, he is so critical and negative. And really, I kind of was seeing him in a completely new light. So we get back to my house and I'm like, I need to say something about it. So we sit down and I said, do you feel like our relationship is going well? Do you feel like we're compatible? Do you actually feel like you care about me? And he was not really responding at all. And in fact, he did what I perceived to be as disassociating. It literally looked to me like he was leaving his body. I had seen this played out on shows, but I had never actually experienced it in real life. And again, as a sensitive empath, I could literally feel his energy kind of receding from me. I could feel him being sad and angry and just confused, but he did not verbalize any of it. He simply got up from where we were sitting, went over to my cat, pet her, and walked out the door. And I was stunned. I was kind of just like, wow, okay. That didn't feel like a very mature way to end a conversation or a relationship for that matter. But I was kind of accepting it at first. But over the course of the evening, I was feeling more and more anxious about it. I felt really terrible about it. And the next day I texted him and I said, I'm really sorry if I hurt your feelings. I really would like to talk to you. Can we have a phone call? Or I want to explain myself, and I really care about you. I feel terrible. And he responded with this one sentence, very curt, have a nice life, or something like that, which was oh my gosh, we had a relationship and that's the last thing you're going to say to me? So I tried to call him and he blocked me, and I had never been blocked before. I didn't even know how to block someone. So I was absolutely stunned. And over the course of a couple weeks, I started to get more and more sad. I felt like I could feel his energy. And I felt like I needed to have closure. I just need to tell him I'm sorry. I just need this to be okay. And I couldn't make it okay. So I started seeing a therapist. And I ended up with a very young therapist. This is what I've talked about before. And the therapist kept saying to me, you don't know what he feels. You don't know. You can't assume that. You're making this up. And I was like, wow, I'm pretty sure I know, at least to some degree, how he feels based on his body language, based on the history I knew with him, and based on my empathy and my energetic exchange. I really did feel like I knew how he felt. Now, she was right to the point of, you never can really fully know unless you ask someone. This is where the closure comes in. But if you are an energetically sensitive person, oftentimes you do know these things. So I was very relieved and happy when about a month or two later, probably about 2 months actually, he contacted me. And I asked him if we could get together for a drink because I really wanted to talk to him. And so we did, and we had a nice, we talked, we caught up. he kind of had fallen into the same pattern of being negative and complaining, but he was a lot more positive than he had been in the past. And we talked a little. I was able to apologize a little bit then. And then we basically kind of started to rekindle slowly the relationship. And on the very first time, like, he came over my house, I had ordered dinner, and again, I sat down, and he said to me, I really can appreciate someone who can admit when they're wrong. And I thought for a minute, and I was like, oh, that's great. But at no point did he take any accountability in any of his behaviors, in anything that he had done, and anything that I had previously brought up. And I sat there as I ate, and I thought, uh-oh, like, this is not good. Like, I'm going down the same path, and he's showing that he's not about to change. That he isn't changing. This isn't really the closure I want. But over time, I did, get to apologize more and be more clear in our communication. And that was something that, by the way, that this was like 7 years ago, and I had not developed good communication skills. I had a lot of codependency, and my behavior was just as at fault as his was, but where there was the disconnect was that he wasn't taking any responsibility or ownership for his side of it. So it just was not going to ever go well. So of course, as expected, in a span of just a couple weeks, he did something again that was super, super insensitive, and I got very upset, and he abruptly broke up with me. And I was like, at that point, I was relieved. I realized, okay, the first breakup was smart, and that should have been my closure. But my desire to have this, like, sort of everything wrapped up with a pretty bow, have everything feel more clear, everything feel more compassionate, brought me into yet another not great situation with this person. So the closure was not what I intended it to be. And that is actually frequently the case. A second situation where this happened was very unexpected, but also something that I think I secretly was craving. I had a job where I worked with someone, and I liked this person so very much. We had such a strong, fun connection. We talked all the time. It was like we had very similar beliefs and interests, and we really were like, we had such a great connection. But I learned over time that this person was lying to me about certain things. They were manipulating me, and the environment in the job was toxic in general. And so I ultimately ended up leaving. And I wasn't happy about leaving. Because the job, I actually really liked the job, and I had good benefits, and I ended up having to walk away from that because of all the other toxic things. And of course that wasn't something that I was able to just be happy about when it happened. So about 2 years after that, this person texts me and says, "Can I talk to you?" And out of the blue, once we start speaking, they apologized for all of it. They apologized for their role. They knew that they had done some things that were not great. They wished I was back in their lives. They really appreciated me, and they missed me. And it was fantastic, actually, in terms of an apology and a sense of forgiveness being laid out. And I forgive this person, and we cried together, and it was amazing. I hung up the phone, and it was like a weight had been lifted off of me. However, slowly over time, the reality of what had happened in that situation kept creeping back at me, kept reminding me that I had left for a reason and things were not good, and that this person had a lot to do with it. And so while I could forgive them, I could not forget. And while I could move on with a new version of our relationship, again, it was a different version. And so that closure that I had, while great, wasn't really fully what I intended or what I could have hoped for. It didn't wipe the slate clean, and that's usually how this goes. Closure does not do that for us. It just shifts us perhaps in a certain way. So if we're not really able to get closure from other people, the people who have hurt us, the relationships that failed, the things that have not gone quite how we wanted them to, how do we get this closure and stop the ruminating of wondering why things went so wrong? And the primary answer is simple, but it's quite challenging to do. It is, of course, through acceptance. It's looking at the very black and white truth of the situation and acknowledging that it is what it is. It happened, and nothing can change that. If a job, friendship, or romantic connection was actually right for you, it would not have ended. If another person really wanted a connection with you, they would have put in the effort and treated you more lovingly. That is your connection, is accepting and understanding that. Another approach to self-closure is surrendering to a higher power. I have another video on how much the universe supported me and sent me signs during my divorce and afterwards. It was one of the hardest periods of my life, and I can still look back on it and see how it absolutely had to happen for a happier, healthier life to emerge for me. I've also talked about this concept in terms of rejection being protection. I find that to be helpful to remember as well, and I've had another video on that topic because it is a way to find that closure in knowing that sometimes the things that are not meant for us will get stripped away because we are holding too tight, trying to make them work. And the higher power, the universe, the path that is really your full alignment knows better than you do, and it's going to shift on your behalf. Also, 8 practices that I have used over the years, and some of these I have shared actually in my book, Online Dating for Sensitive Women, and my book and course, Free from Narcissists. These are all ways that you can give yourself closure and help yourself feel better. The first is you can write a letter to the person you are seeking closure from. Everything is energy, even the written word. So when you put out a letter of intention, of closure, or even of seeking forgiveness in letter form, even if you do not have access to that person in human form, you are still able to subtly change that energy, correct it, shift it, make it more positive. If not only for yourself in your own mind and your own spirit, but I actually believe that it helps in the other person's energy and spirit as well. So write it out. Write out a letter telling this person everything you would say in your most compassionate words. If you had that person in front of you. And then burn the letter, rip the letter, destroy the letter, do whatever you want to do to release that energy. But many times it's best not to send the letter, especially if the person is estranged from you, if the person was narcissistic or bullying you, if you know in your heart of hearts that they're not going to change and that the relationship cannot be rekindled. This is just a way to give you that final closure, that seal, and to release yourself from any sort of energetic binds that you're feeling from it. If you're not a writer, the alternative to this is to talk it out. And it's funny, I was thinking about doing this video and I saw a reel on something that apparently in therapy is called the empty chair exercise, where you actually talk to an empty chair as if it's the person sitting in front of you. I've never done that in particular, but it makes sense. I usually just talk it out. I talk a lot, talk to myself a lot, and I find it very helpful. Don't believe anyone who says that talking to yourself makes you crazy. No, talking to yourself makes you very rational because it helps you rationalize a lot of your thoughts by putting them into words if you are a verbal person. So talk out again have a conversation with this person. And again, this can energetically sort of shift your feeling around this person and help you to feel better. Of course, if this resonates with you, you can also work with a coach. I offer compassionate coaching, or you can find a therapist that has the right style for you and test that out and see if that works. But talking things through oftentimes can really help us. The third is a little bit woo-woo, but I like my woo-woo stuff. You can perform a full moon ritual. Full moons are about the culmination of a cycle. When we were more in line with the moon cycles, we did see this as like the harvesting period was during like the full moon. And so full moons can represent release. So you can either do the writing exercise that I mentioned during a full moon and then burn under the light of the moon that letter and sort of give it up and say, I am releasing this energy, I am releasing this emotion. Or you don't need to have fire at all. You can actually bury the letter. You can do whatever feels right to you, but utilize the actual timing and the power of the full moon to give it an extra oomph and to make it more ritualistic, if that's something that resonates to you. The fourth thing you can do, and I talk about this all the time because I use this tool all the time, is to journal on the issue. Just talk through all the potential outcomes, all the potential whys. So a lot of times, like I said with the closure, we're looking for the why of a situation. So why not give yourself the answers? Why not come up with your own theories? They're not necessarily likely to be true, but they can give you some depth to your thinking. They can offer you some options. And also, they can help you work through how you might have handled that type of situation in the future. So the person I mentioned that I dated, I journaled quite a bit on that person because I realized how much I was complicit in that situation, how much I was part of the problem, and how my lack of confident and direct communication with that person was part of why we kept having the negativity. If I had been better about being really clear about how his behavior was affecting me early on, it never would have gone that way. And I found that through journaling, I could come to that answer. I could see how I needed to be braver and bolder in my relationships going forward. The fifth thing is to maintain a gratitude practice, which I've also talked about before, and that's very simple. It's just finding gratitude in all of the things. And with this particular situation, find gratitude in this specific thing. So let's say the job that actually ended, that I still have had some issues with mourning, I came to a place of so much greater healing, so much greater freedom. I wrote both of my books. So leaving that job was necessary for all of those things. And when I get into a headspace of why did that job have to fail, I remind myself because I needed to do all these other things, because I needed to be using my energy in a different way, in the way that I'm using it now. That place was no longer right for me. And so finding the gratitude in that helps me to let it go and release and move on in a happier way. The sixth thing you could do also may feel a little bit woo-woo to some people, but you can cut cords of energy. We get cords of energy between each other, especially if you are a really sensitive people. People sometimes will cord up with you. I mentioned in my last video being an unintentional energy vampire. I have frequently had people attach cords to me. And by working with a really well-trained energy healer, they could see those cords, they could help release them. You can also do meditations to help cut cords. You can do the practice yourself. Or you can have a Reiki session where they're working on healing on your energy with the intention of releasing any of those relationship blocks that you have or any attachments to people that you are ready to give up and move on and find the closure from. That can be so, so helpful. Again, if you are especially as sensitive to energy, you will very likely need the help of an expert, someone who has a lot more healing qualities, or even just a lot more empowerment over that healing. It can be very hard for us to do that kind of thing by ourselves, even if we are skilled, quite frankly. The seventh thing, and I would be remiss if I didn't say this, but this is to work on forgiveness. Part of closure really is forgiveness. And forgiveness can be really hard depending on the severity of the abuse you've been through or the challenges you've been through. And so it is not mandatory that you forgive the person, but it is mandatory that you forgive yourself for getting into the situation and all the ways that you contributed to it. You have to forgive yourself, because that is sort of a self-abusive energy. If you are beating yourself up for saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, it is what it is. The acceptance there is, maybe you made a mistake. You're going to do it better the next time. So work on that forgiveness piece. If you do feel ready to forgive the person, work on forgiving them. And even maybe as part of your journaling or your writing exercises, you can plant that thought in with those activities of, I forgive this other person. And then finally, the eighth thing is giving a situation time. It's definitely not true that time heals everything. It doesn't heal all our wounds, no. But time does give us distance and perspective. When you are right in something and it is emotionally raw and it has just happened, it is really hard to find closure. You're just not ready yet. You have to work through it all. And so that is why I kept this for the last piece. That is why it's sort of like the final cap on the project. Many things just need time to release, to dissipate, to be healed over, and then we can move on. And the thing is, as we heal and evolve, we can much more easily look back at situations and realize that you aren't likely to experience that type of situation the same way now, because you're a different person, and hopefully the other person and other people in the scenario are also different people. So even the idea of going back to a scenario, going back to a relationship or a job, it's never going to be the same. So it's so much easier just to keep walking on and give yourself the closure around the things that you have left, knowing that they ended for a good reason. And you don't necessarily need to know fully the why. You just need to know that they did, and you are likely going to be on a better path because of that. So I really hope this helps. I know that not having closure can feel really painful and be super confusing too. It is honestly, I think, one of the hardest parts of being human is not understanding why people do things, not understanding why things happen. We often just cannot know with certainty the why behind things. And we just have to accept that it is part of our path. Hopefully, and very likely, it's a part that makes you stronger and it makes you wiser. And it sets you up for a future of more successful relationships and better outcomes. So, as always, I wish you happiness and good health, and I thank you for being with me.